Next up, Aaron Levy. He is the co-founder of Box. Box, as some of you may know, provides cloud storage for companies, actually a lot of companies, which is interesting because Levy says that when he started out in 2005, it was hard to convince people that the cloud was the future. He's here to tell Steve how he persuaded them the cloud was the way of the future, and also how along the way he's become one of Silicon Valley's most interesting tweeters. If you're not following him already, you may want to start right now. Steve, Aaron, welcome.
Aaron, thanks for joining us today.
Sure. Thank you.
I am trying to, you didn't wear bold shoes. I wore bold socks to
this is more,
compete. That's what you're known for.
subtle for the Atlantic.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't knock the Atlantic.
No, I want to be appropriate.
I was on the stage this morning with Padma Warrior, who's a member of your board, and I just realized that we're responsible for introducing the two of you.
You are. Yeah.
So
technically, that is true.
The dinner we host in Silicon Valley is where the two of you met. So why does Box...
Did you get the commission check?
And they did not get the commission check, but I know our chairman watching this right now is really interested in that. But what is Padma Warrior? I mean, we had this discussion about healthcare, about how the Internet of Everything is actually going to change everything, but is going to come in and really create some interesting disruptions. But she's a poet. She does haiku on Twitter, and she paints, and she has a son in creative writing. So she says there's a soul in our future. But I'm interested, just as a quick beginning point, when you're thinking about growing your business, what did you need in Padma Warrior and Cisco in terms of the pool of expertise she represented while you brought her on the board?
Yeah, and let me first just clarify why I sound like I'm dying on stage. I have a polyp in my vocal cord.
We have a doctor right out here.
So I don't know if anybody can treat this live.
Yeah. I was knocking him, saying that the future is going to put him out of work, but I think he's got a job now.
If he's focused on polyps, he definitely has a job. But it'll sound a little scratchy. I apologize. So Padma is just incredibly, I think, forward-thinking, obviously visionary. The areas that she is involved in, certainly through Cisco, but then prior, are all extremely relevant to us. So if you think about the big trends that Cisco is actually the enabler of, Box is actually we benefit from the output of the things that they're enabling. So when you think about, 3 billion people on the internet going to maybe 6 billion, when you think about the billions of smartphones and devices that we're working from, Cisco is at the backbone of all of that. Internet of Things is certainly a driver of that. And the more devices you work from, the more locations you work from, the more places where you need to be able to share and collaborate, then the more that we benefit, and certainly helps our business. So she sees all of that. She works with the enterprises and the industries that are either going to directly benefit from that right now or driving it. And so that's her, I think, perspective that she adds to the board. Not to mention, obviously, leader of a big organization. So a lot of the sort of.
Well, I mean, you guys are growing like crazy, and I just became, I think, your 72nd millionth in one client, because I just downloaded Box onto my phone. And
32nd millionth.
So I just did something along those lines, and I think one of the interesting.
Are you paying us or not?
Not yet, but I'm willing to if I have a good experience.
That's why we can't give you the commission to the Padma.
Okay, we'll upgrade and do this. One other thing I wanted to get into, just get it out of the way, and then talk about some meaty stuff, is that I was telling you in the back that I have a hard time understanding the economics of Silicon Valley. That everyone I know that sort of made it here lost a lot of money over a long period of time. Yeah. You've announced that Box will be up for an IPO sometime this next year. Or so. I think you're on schedule for that. But when I looked at it, you had to report the amount of money you've made, and that the net gains and the net losses.
Yeah. They went different directions.
They went different directions, and you're on sort of. I actually began to worry because you and I have known each other for a couple of years now. But
I
saw
said you're from the publishing business.
But we actually make money. The Atlantic, a 157-year-old publication, is profitable. But you've said that you're going into the stock market for $250 million. And given the amount of money you're losing on an annual basis, I want you to go for $1 billion. Okay. So because you're going to be out of business. Where am I missing in the map?
Sounds like you want to join our board.
I do. Yeah. Okay. So how does it work?
So it works with. So we ended up when we filed the S1 for our IPO, it was the only numbers we showed were last year's numbers, and that was the point where the business was where we had the most investment in kind of growth relative to our revenue scale.
Right.
So the dynamic of our business model, and most SaaS companies or recurring revenue business companies, is that you pay a certain amount of money to acquire a customer, and then they keep paying you, ideally if you're doing your job year after year. And so you basically make a calculated decision of how much are you willing to spend to invest in the growth of the business to acquire those customers, and how much do you think you make over the long run. And so when we filed our IPO, it happened to be at a point where we were investing the most, again, relative to the size of that recurring revenue base. And I think what you'll see when we do updated filings is a little bit of a different story. So it doesn't actually extrapolate to needing $1 billion.
Well, I appreciate that.
Unfortunately, beyond that, the SEC will sue me if I talk about it.
Oh, glad to hear that. My job is to push a little bit. But the other thing I'm interested in is, if you were to think back 10 years ago, I was watching, on cable last night, Social Network was, the movie was on, and it was just, it's shocking to me that was just 10 years ago. So when you look at the scale, when you started the company, the kinds of things you've done, sort of the transitions that are happening within industry after industry after industry. We used to sort of talk about how doctors in the medical and health profession would be able to do things online,
yeah.
but nobody really believed necessarily that it was coming. So all of that is happening, and I'm interested in how you sort of envision the not only the changes we're seeing today, but how, I asked Padma this, what is our world going to look like? What's the Emerald City going to look like that we're going to live in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, actually, if you go back and I've tried to follow some of the industries that have been transformed the past kind of 2 decades or so. If you go back, maybe 2 decades, actually, I would say that there was a lot of talk about how much change was going to happen, and because we started to see the seeds of that sort of revolution, where the browser emerged, we finally had at least a relatively ubiquitous kind of internet access. And you could start to see, well, what would happen if you take healthcare records and you connect them all together, and then anybody who has any particular ailment could be diagnosed based on all of the data that you have from every other person that had those set of symptoms. And so a lot of the original ideas that we're finally seeing emerge in terms of being realized, actually people talked about 20 years ago, and I think we actually thought that they were going to happen way sooner. The problem is that we were just wrong on a lot of the fundamental the quality and the ubiquity and the robustness of a lot of those initial sort of foundational building blocks. So the internet wasn't fast enough. The browser didn't produce rich enough experiences. We didn't really have mobile devices. When you think about the kinds of applications and the kinds of use cases we did on a mobile phone, even just 5 years ago, but especially 10 years ago, it was just a very different kind of world. So a lot of the theories existed that we'd get better healthcare, that we'd shop on demand from everywhere, that we would have much more efficient transportation. These things were ideas that emerged 10, 20 years ago, but we just didn't have the building blocks to make that finally possible. And so what we've seen in the past 3 to 4 years is a confluence of a couple billion people on the internet, the cost of computing just continuing to drop dramatically, the cost of storage continuing to drop dramatically, which means that we can create more data, we can do more with data, we can store all of the data. You can build all new experiences. Just very basic things like the ubiquity of GPS in our phones makes it so much easier to do on-demand things, because we now have location as this sort of frictionless element of these products. And so, I think where this all goes, and the Emerald City per se is and I would phrase it a little bit differently, which is if you look at the opposite of all of the areas where we have friction today, or where we have inefficiencies, I would just say that this is where technology is going to take us. So for things that you have really inefficient marketplaces, whether that's for healthcare or insurance or buying your pharmaceutical drugs or for renting a home or renting a room, anything where you can have a software overlay that will better connect a buyer and a seller, you're just going to see a dramatic reduction in that kind of friction. Anything that can be turned on demand will just become on demand, because we now have the ubiquity of the sort of on-demand logistics networks, whether that's Uber or Lyft or Postmates today launched an API. You're going to start to see now this new layer of real-time logistics that then is going to create an all-new wave of innovation and entrepreneurship that can kind of evolve on top of that. And so you have to sort of think about it as almost layers of that sort of core nucleus of, okay, we have mobile technology, we have computing, we have low-cost ubiquitous computing. They produce maybe real-time, on-demand, universal logistics, and then what does that then produce? So we're really only at the stage where sort of we can't even see the kind of first derivative effects of all of these technologies, but we know that they're going to change healthcare, life sciences, retail, transportation, kind of all of the major pillars of our lives. Education obviously would be critically important. Then a result of all of this is obviously more job creation. So I think the things that we just think of as high points of friction, inefficiency, and annoyances begin to go away because you have the
there are a
building
lot of things that make you a very interesting person, but one of them is, as I said when we met in New York recently, is you seem to be one of the few Silicon Valley CEO leader types that has a soul in the sense that you worry about those people displaced. You've written a lot about the social safety net and about the fact that you see this powerful technology trend.
To be fair, written a lot means I've tweeted like three times.
Yeah,
but
you
yes,
tweeted
okay.
3 times.
Yes.
Okay,
But
they were
for this
powerful.
generation,
They were to
that's a lot
Mark
about it, yes.
Andreessen, and he responded. So, the point is, you describe this vision of the future, and sometimes I wonder where's the place for people in this.
Yes.
And who doesn't? What do you do with people who aren't as
We
caught
haven't,
up?
we haven't figured out
Yeah.
the people component yet.
Yeah.
But the
explain-
robots are going to do great.
Yeah, the
So
robots will do
they're
great.
Huge.
You don't
huge-
really need people, right? Is it the Bill Joy article, "The Future Doesn't Need Us"?
I mean, that's certainly one potential outcome, but I'm not going to pull Elon Musk right now. So I would say that I don't know that I have more or less of a soul than anybody else. I just,
But you talk about we need to do
Yeah.
something for those people
Well,
displaced.
I think that I don't have the solution by any means, but we certainly know the problem, and I think and actually I think a lot of people share this, and not everybody has figured out the best way to articulate it because you kind of have to go on faith a little bit. But I do think that, and okay, of course this is completely biased because we happen to be at least in the place where a lot of this is going to be created. So we just have an earlier sort of lens and vantage point on these trends. But I'm certainly very optimistic that for any sort of dislocation in one part of the economy, you end up creating new opportunities in a different way. And I think there's just this.
Alan Greenspan said that a lot. Yeah, the churn was healthy and good.
Okay.
And so you believe that, you buy that. That's the libertarian line.
Yes, but I don't believe it. I don't believe it in sort of I mean, certainly maybe some components come from a libertarian point of view, but I don't believe it for purely blind faith. It's like I've seen this. So you have some segment of the economy that might get disrupted by a new technology, but that new technology creates leverage for a different part of the economy to then create all new jobs and opportunities. So for every taxi driver that is obviously being disrupted right now, you have 10 people that now can drive as an extra job. So we look at the area where the disruption is acute, but we don't necessarily extrapolate to what does that actually then benefit in terms of what is that going to create now a new opportunity for a different part of the ecosystem. And so I just believe in physics, which is that there's going to be some counter reaction that then creates a new set of opportunities. And so as long as we have a creative environment for entrepreneurship, people will find business opportunities that then ultimately create jobs and roles for people that are displaced. Now, the biggest problem and why the safety net is an important topic is often it's not one-to-one in the sense of it's not the same person being displaced that is the same person that benefits. It might sort of oscillate, to groups of people. So you might end up having then this sort of interim period where for a couple years or for some cohort of the economy, you do have to figure out how do you actually create better education, how do you create better opportunities, how do you engage them in new ways, and that's the important issue, and that's where the maybe social safety net comes in, and where you need to have, where we need to realize that things like our education systems are totally broken because they sort of assume that you can learn everything that you can possibly learn for, the first 15 years of your education, and then all of a sudden the world will be static and you'll just be able to leverage those lessons and go off in the world for 70 years and do things, and that's just not the way that it's going to work. So you obviously need a huge component of education that ties into this as well, that we're just starting to figure out maybe how does that get implemented at scale.
Right, so I want to go to the audience in a moment, but two things. You love Uber, and you know Travis Kalanick. Does he show up sometimes in the street corner where you're going to arrive and say, hey, Aaron, great to see you here?
only if I tell him to, I guess, be there.
So he's not checking it. You guys aren't laughing. This is a big joke in D.C. and New York, or any places where journalists have been threatened with
all
or
offended.
tracking. No, but it's sort of a
dare
backdoor
you
way.
come here and say that.
It's a backdoor way into the kind of broad question of data and privacy and how you keep the world safe in a world where technologically, sure, Uber's been tracking us because they send us the little line where we're going, and we're able to turn that in for our expense receipts and say we went from point A to point B. You've been talking a little bit about government and the fact that government is now coming in and compelling particularly data housing and data collection and file storing. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of files that Box may have that the government may be interested in. So I'm sort of interested in this world that very few of us as consumers understand or know about, in which firms know more about us, the government wants to know more about us, Brazil's laws are different, so Brazil may be interested in doing things that are different, but how do we sort through the right kind of social contract in managing data and the role of companies, government, and people?
Yeah, so I think there's two contracts. There's a social contract, and then there's literally a government regulatory element of this, and they are separate but interconnected issues. The social contract obviously just needs to be that you need to be able to trust the companies that you use services from, and this is actually what is great about capitalism is that when you don't trust a company and what they do, you just choose a different provider and a different vendor, and that's why you actually need open ecosystems as opposed to ones that are either monopolized or where through high friction relationships, certain players are able to establish different levels of sort of dominance in a market. You want very efficient, very open ecosystems because if we don't trust one company, we can go to another. So the first is that I think we as users of these tools need to have a certain expectation of what we are going to get out of those technologies. And I think that in the history, for the past kind of 10 years of, let's say, this modern topic, when starting out at the Facebook news feed 9 years ago or whatever, where we really started to realize that these technologies knew more about us than we certainly knew about ourselves or about others. I think from that point, we have been able to actually create the right kind of tension and counterbalance to what companies do or are able to leverage with that data. And I would posit that in the past 9 to 10 years, we have probably far more perceived theoretical risk than actually things that have actually emerged. And so I would just say that it's important. It's an important tension. But ultimately, the great thing about capitalism is companies generally.
I think the Uber thing is not that it was horrible. It just reminded people of what's possible, that there could be a slippery slope. But on the government side?
So on the government side, it's way worse. Because
way worse?
Yes, because there's no counterbalance to the government. We don't get to choose another government if our current government. I mean, some people probably think they do. I mean, there's seasteading, I guess. But you don't really. We can't opt out of the government. And so our problem with the government's level of control and involvement in these areas is that we don't have any particular tension. Except for maybe some politicians that posture because they want to have some cohort or some constituency that feels like they're on their side or whatever. But even so, it's a highly complex kind of apparatus. And so let's take the one that is sort of most visible and recent. It's the NSA scandal, which is the NSA has decided that for the safety of all of us and for the protection of our domestic interests, they need to be able to have certain kinds of access to data through any means necessary. And the problem is there is no counterbalance.
So what do you do when they show up? Like, is it like B316 or something and scandal, and they say you're going to do this, and you say no, and you say you have no option? Like how does that actually happen? Do they send you a note?
We say you can't handle the truth, and clever lines like that. So. No, I think so without getting into specifics, I think what you read about with some of the NSA and Snowden stuff, and that, frankly, and I'll get into the kind of second element of this in a second, but frankly, that more affected consumer applications, the Facebooks and Gmails and Skypes of the world, where those platforms are factually being used by the parties that the NSA is interested in. So you had sort of you had some theoretical justification for the topic, but the process by which the NSA actually went, and actually tried to do that data retrieval is the big issue. That level of surveillance is the big issue. So the problem that we have is that, and this is something that this is why we have a problem when you don't have that sort of counterbalance of that tension is what the government didn't realize in all of this process was the implications and the consequences of doing what they did. And so it turns out there is a counterbalance, which is, but it wasn't the one that we all thought as consumers. It's not us being up in arms and tweeting a lot, saying that we don't like the NSA because that doesn't, actually, in fact, the NSA loves that because now you're giving them more data. So ultimately, that's not a good countertension. That did nothing. So that's why the Senate didn't even change, the NSA policies at this most recent vote was because there's literally nothing we can collectively do except for somebody deciding that it is in our best interest and our civil liberties to change that. However, here's the real counterbalance, and this is the one that the government didn't think about, because if you don't think about technology and you don't think about world politics, then you won't possibly kind of connect the dots on this. And you brought up Brazil. So the issue is, if the US government's approach to surveillance is very draconian and very extreme, then what you do is you create an environment where other governments have to do two things. One is they need environments that are equally draconian and equally extreme in their surveillance. But likely, and what we've already seen in Germany as an example, is they will have data policies for their own civilians, for their own companies, that will be equally draconian and extreme. So what you're seeing is an environment where we have this potential for massive sort of balkanization of the internet, massive balkanization of technology, sort of massive internet isolationism, and you're going to get to the point where the US will then lose in material ways because the companies in the US that are selling internet services on a global scale will not be able to compete internationally because you'll have foreign companies that have an instant unfair advantage just because of their domestic sort of relationships. And so then you really actually will impact your domestic interests. And so that's the first time we've actually had a real counterbalance that isn't sort of soft and sort of really that only the ACLU cares about. It's something that ultimately the business interests of the US are at stake, because if you don't have a healthy internet, then you don't have global collaboration, you don't have the leverage and the position that the US companies that have been building technology services then can go on an international basis and work globally, and that is actually going to impact us. So that's finally resonating, but it's going to take some time to work through it.
Well, we're going to take it there. Padma Warrior this morning joked that I had a dark view of technology, and I think sometimes it's useful to hypothesize and to think and sketch out the dark pictures that you just laid so that we know how to sort out the various options. I would love to go to questions, but we're out of time.
Okay.
Aaron Levy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great being with you. Thank you.